Hello everyone, this is Jay Wilburn again, and I'm about to edit a story called Hell is Only Half Full. This story is raw. I've just finished writing it today and I haven't gone through it once, so there's going to be a lot to correct, I'm sure. Off to the side here you see a slideshow of a trilogy I wrote for young adults called Made the Zombie Kingdom. Has some fantasy in it, has a little bit of horror in terms of some zombies in the story and that sort of thing. It is a little higher peril for readers than the Lake Scatterwood series or Time Travel Academy, which are for middle grades and younger readers. This is young adult, so there's a little bit more in it toward horror, but it's still young adult, so it's not to the level of maybe the story that I'm reading and working on today, or some of my other work that's specifically for adults. So let's not mess around and just get right into it. Okay, you'll see this is the story, and I'll read through it as I'm editing it, and this will be exactly what I would do with the story on a first pass. I'm going to put it up on Patreon tomorrow as of the time that I'm recording this, and then I'll have the recording of this video up just about 5 minutes after it. So anybody that just wants to read the finished story, finished as in probably a first or second draft, then they'll have that, and then people that are interested in how I worked on or revised the story will get that as well. Alright, so it's a little over 6,000 words. If I were submitting this somewhere, excuse me, if I were submitting this somewhere, very likely I would have to edit it down. First part I might edit down is actually this first page or so. A lot of authors, including myself, sometimes have trouble knowing where to start a story, and it's usually a little ways in from where you actually begin. So very likely the information that's in this first section could be expressed elsewhere in the story in smaller pieces and not require this sort of prelude, I guess you'd say. I'm going to leave it in for now as I edit through. Alright, Hell is Only Half Full by Jay Wilburn. Damned if Reverend John Saturday didn't tear a button off Cotton Wretched's last shirt, and still the bigger man couldn't get the preacher to let loose of him. Others were watching. No one Cotton cared about, but eyes on him, along with his thread of friendship with John, proved just enough to keep him from brushing knuckles through the man's jaw. You promised her, and I'm calling it in on her behalf, cowboy. Cotton seized the Reverend's wrists, and they felt like dry kindling under his grip. He squeezed as much as he dared, and then a little more than that, but they remained locked a while longer. I don't work cows, and no one gets saved out here anymore. No one finds rescue. Cotton! The hell you want me to say, John? Say not a thing. Eyes wide enough and uniformly bloodshot so that were this any other man, Cotton would swear he was full of opium or rot gut. Nod your head, give a wink, draw my blood like I can see in your eyes that you want to do, but ride with me. We have to go back for her. She needs us to. She needs us to. Okay, she needs us to go. Alright, I'm going to, so it doesn't look like a typo, I'm going to say she needs us to come. She needs us to come, but both of us or none at all. The other eyes found other places to look, and their feet followed. A fight was something to watch. What these men parlayed over was something else that could kill them all. They left boot prints in the dust, and the desert wind erased those for them. Let's specify who they are, because we're not talking about the two men. The others. Right. The others left boot prints in the dust, and then the desert wind erased those for them. Alright. The pair bound together in each other's grips ignored the retreat. Layers of dirt mixed with sweat caked and cracked along their lined faces. It irritated the edges of their eyes and sparkled with a dozen minerals from the blowing sand. If dry had a smell, It burned deep inside their nostrils, flared at one another. Now I could actually pull that paragraph out. It's maybe interesting description, but it doesn't really advance the story. So if I were trying to move it along, I might cut that. And like I said, everything up to the dividing line there for the scene break, I could probably cut all of this and just go in with them moving, and you kind of get the idea that they're going after something. It might actually improve the story in the sense that you wouldn't know exactly what their mission is right away. Heard you preach of hell, John, with explicit enough detail. I sometimes think you visit the place on the regular. Cotton glared down in the man's wild eyes and bloodless face. But don't think to drag me down with you if you're going to up and die on me in the first 100 yards or so. I know what awaits us, Cotton Wretched. I'll see it through to the end, whatever the cost. You better reload as fast as you double talk, you snake. I'll not have you taking me to my death after contributing one charge. Cotton pulled the preacher closer instead of trying to tear him away any longer. And if you stop to pray to God who abandoned this scorched earth behind us, okay, put a comma there because it's an if. And if you stop to pray to the God who abandoned this scorched earth behind us, you're pulling me back into, I'll shoot you myself. You better put faith in that gospel truth. I'll probably capitalize earth here. I'm probably just talking about the dirt, but I don't want people to think that's not it, or to get distracted by it or something along those lines. Alright. I did all my praying before I came to force you to keep your promise to her. I'm off my knees now, Cotton. Like Jacob wrestling the angel, John only let go once Cotton surrendered his blessing. They mounted up and went back the direction from which every surviving soul had fled. Alright, so if I were publishing it and needed to cut some words, I would probably take that whole section out. Leaving it in is probably a mistake, but I'm going to do it for now. And if you maybe imagine that this next part is where the story starts, it may be a stronger story because I haven't just up and explained why these two men are together at that point. Cotton Wretched shot the first damned soul through the third eye on his oversized forehead. It was as big as a dinner plate and as good a target as any. Milked over in a blinded fog of white with yellow lumps of crust clinging to the edges, the center pupil was a perfect square, like a squid, and that's where Cotton's bullet punched through to whatever brains lurked inside that bulbous head. Alright, I think I might have used the word bulbous later in the story. If so, I need to take that out. I think I overuse that word sometimes, and you don't want it more than once in a story, I think, or it stands out. The ruptured alien eye spewed out wet yellow pus with a green tinge. It ran over the blistered nose and into the man's mouth. Cracked lips and crooked teeth parted. The white tongue with black specks lapped up the ooze. The humid eyes rolled in their wet sockets, and the mutant trudged forward at the galloping horses as if nothing much had happened to dissuade his attack. He lifted his blades in the air on both sides of his misshapen body, but Cotton opted not to waste another bullet on him. After the men had ridden well out of range, but not yet out of sight, the half-man, down to 2 eyes, collapsed on his face, deciding there wasn't much left to do other than die from his final wounds. Does your jealous God exist in all this, preacher man? Thought you forbade me to pray or preach on this fool's errand, Cotton. Might be for the best, since the answer wouldn't serve your faith none, huh? John Saturday accepted the bait. God is easy to believe in during good times, and easy to cry to during bad. Don't remember good times, John. A lot of marching ahead of monsters recently, but no good times. Been easier to believe in the devil than in a God. The presence of evil implies the presence of good. The next line of corrupted men emerged from the wreckage of fallen roofs and cracked concrete. They brandished firearms of their own, so Cotton and the Reverend decided to waste a few more bullets. Cotton added, Total darkness is proof of the absence of light, not its existence. Get about the dark business ahead of us, then, shall we? The semi-human creatures crouched on haunches, bent back the wrong way into insectile forms and power. Remains of clothing hung shredded on spiked protrusions. They sprung forward, firing wild on the horsemen, with no real effort at aim. They zigged and then zagged to evade the attempted shots of the riders. Whatever this hellish posse intended, they wanted to do it up close. Fire where they're going to be, not where they are. The preacher obeyed, and they managed to cut down a couple, but not all. One dropped its empty weapons and charged straight on the horses over the last few yards of ground. Reverend John Saturday shook his boot loose of the stirrup and hiked his leg over the horse's back on that side just before the razor spines of the mutant's arm tore open the horse from shoulder to rump. Bowels spilled, followed by all manner of gut, and what seemed like a water tower's worth of blood into the sand. Cotton ceased firing long enough to extend an arm. John took it and used his raised boot in the saddle to spring himself over. It was an off-balance launch, so Mr. Wretched's shoulder and back had to bear more strain than he'd hoped. The dying horse attempted to rear away from the pain imposed by the unnatural attacker. It helped Reverend Saturday find his way onto the back of his friend's ride. The horse failed to rise beyond that and collapsed in a way that... Let me specify which horse. The wounded horse. The wounded horse failed to rise beyond that and collapsed in a way that broke 3 of its legs under its own weight. In the lull of fire from the 2 men, the other mutants packing iron managed to rip a few shots close enough for the men to imagine they felt the wind and saw the blur of them passing. In calmer times, Cotton knew that was more imagination than reality, but these were not such times. Cotton leaned around the preacher, situating and reloading behind him, and he shot... the preacher who was... I want it to sound like John is reloading and not Cotton. Cotton leaned around the preacher who was situating and reloading behind him, and he shot the horse-killing bastard in the air as it spun through the air... I can't say air twice. As it spun through the afternoon light. As it spun through the afternoon light. Shot it in the air as it spun through the afternoon light faster than the last horse rode away with the 2 of them. He was about to pop off a 4th shot when he didn't have to. A 4th shot he didn't have, but the mutant dropped and folded itself in half, dead before it hit the muddy ground around the slaughtered animal. As Cotton gripped the reins in his teeth and reloaded 2 sidearms, John proved he could shoot better when he wasn't handling the horse himself. Say handling a horse. When he wasn't handling a horse himself. Blast around Cotton's sides played hell with his hearing, but may have saved his life. They passed the rubble these things had used for cover, with their own hides and half their horses intact. With the 2 men's own hides and half their horses intact. The last few monsters fell upon the dead animal instead of continuing the fight. One chewed at the bloody dirt. Others dined on their fallen brethren. Most fought each other for a taste of the untainted horse meat. John Saturday took a few more shots, peeling the mutants off the body. It was a waste of ammunition, but Cotton didn't call him on it this time. The trail took them around a bend and then down into a rough, rocky valley. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Then bend and took them let's make it them at least, took them down into a rough and rocky valley out of sight of the killing ground. I'm trying to say valley? Rocky, let's just say valley. Alright, valley out of sight of the killing ground. The last few would just have to be left to feed. Cotton told himself that would be a few less they'd have to deal with on the way back, even though he doubted their chances of having a return trip, much less getting that far in one. Okay? A sovereign and all-powerful God started back up like they'd never been interrupted, would be responsible for all this, not merely allowing it to transpire, but directing his will in practice, if not an honest word. John took a deep breath and sighed as they fell into the rocky channel below a higher ridge. Dangerous territory to be distracted. God doesn't shy from responsibility. Maybe he directs us through it. Maybe God doesn't care, Cotton snapped at him. John was grateful for the next problem that arose to interrupt. Alright, I kind of like, and I did this on purpose, so the dialogue about God I wrote separately and then sort of split it up in the trip. It may be a little heavy, so if I were taking a second pass on this, I might cut some of that back a little bit, make it a little less formal, I don't know. But I really like the idea of a couple men having sort of a conversation, maybe a deep conversation about God in the midst of just profane action. So it kind of feels out of place, but again, they're having the conversation for a reason. Maybe God doesn't care, Cotton snapped at him. John was grateful for the next problem that arose to interrupt. The next structure and threat came from a shack built into the larger of the rocks on the right side of the ridge. The right side ridge. I want to say there's two ridges of the ridge on the right. Let's say that. Of the ridge on their right. It could have been a store or a mining cabin, might have been set back into a natural cave. In contrast to the dry desert landscape in all directions, this shaded spot spread out dark and green. It looked and smelled almost swampy. The sagging pitch of the roof that overhung the crooked porch grew thick with moss that separated the shingles in a way that would leak like a sieve if there was ever rain in this place. This infection of moisture rose from the ground itself like a weeping sore. A lone figure on the porch sat in a rocker but didn't rock. It waited on the pair to draw closer through the narrow pass. Only then did it square its holey boots and stand straight up, too tall for the edge of the porch, even without a hat on his boil-covered scalp. Now, you can't actually see his head, so how do you know his scalp is boiled? Without a hat on its boil-covered, to say, brow. That way it's below the hat and you can potentially see it. If you don't see under the hat, you can't say that his scalp is covered. All right. 3 steps brought it to the edge of the uneven boards. It braced an elbow on the high hitching post, wrapped its arms around the slimy support post, and extended the aim of its long gun out to where the riders were going to be and not where they were. Cotton cursed and drew the horse as close as he dared to the inside wall of rock. As they raced along the rough surface of the rock face, the material of their coats hissed along it. Let's say. Hissed along it, getting rubbed thin. It wasn't much in the way of cover, and the lone gunman adjusted his aim by a few degrees and waited on them unflussed. Cotton balled the leather reins in one fist and thumbed back the hammer on the shooter in the other. "John, I see him." John aimed over Cotton's hip, under the man's arm, and out to the side from the horse's bobbing head. They got close enough to see the glassy eyes, the green beard dripping long strings of filth the same pond scum shade as the gritted teeth, and the spots of red and black mold growing around the figure's damp duster. The only clean and maintained piece on the lot was the gun itself. The thing was polished brass even down along the stock that would normally be made of wood, rested in the pit of the creature's shoulder. The only black on it was the long shaft of the barrel, thicker and blacker than a typical iron rifle. The sights on the end of the barrel were brass and over-large, forming a glittering head on the end of the gun, which was ridged underneath with the bore opening in a slit at the end of the brass sights. As they drew closer, the gun caught light from under the porch. Iron veins along the length of the shaft stood out like blood vessels. The creature wrapped its gnarled hand around the trigger that had no guard. The trigger itself was two round brass balls, curved to look like a sack of lumpy skin. Alright, so obviously I'm describing something a little profane here, but wanted to do so without coming right out and saying what it looked like. So that's kind of the idea here, to describe a thing without coming right out and saying it. Cotton fired, and John's gun cracked off a shot a split second after. One shot ricocheted with an invisible spark high off the last curve of stone before the dooryard of the mossy structure. Cotton marked that as his shot and cursed himself as he drew back his hammer again. That was one risk of skirting the wall like this. John's bullet sparked off the bulbous head. You see, I had to use bulbous again. I knew I'd done that. Do I want to describe the size or the material? Let's just say brass. Probably going to use brass again, though. Okay. Off the... let's just say head. Let's just not even describe it at all. Alright. John's bullet sparked off the head of the rifle and pitched it up by a fraction. The rifle doesn't have a head. I need to specify what I'm talking about here. Okay. What's a good word? Let's describe its color. Alright, we'll say purple shaded. Okay. Let's see if that... let's go tinged. That way we're not describing something purple, it just has a little bit of purple in it. John's bullet sparked off the purple-tinged head of the rifle and pitched it up by a fraction. The preacher pulled down instead of back on the firing balls. A concussion like dynamite rolled through the rocks. A bullet struck the rocky ridge across from the men and punched through like a cannonball. Larger shards of stone pounded onto the ground where they would have been riding if they'd stuck to the center. Smaller bits of sharp rock and dust rained down onto their hats and shoulders. Now, okay, one problem with any kind of gunfight is you overpower the guns. And so this strange gun, we need to specify that this sort of explosive concussion is too much for it. There was no bullet. Cotton knew that would cause this sort of damage. There was no bullet Cotton knew that would cause this sort of damage. Let's say no matter what pulp storybooks might tell. Alright. There was no bullet Cotton knew that would cause this sort of damage, no matter what the pulp storybooks might tell. Nothing obeyed the rules of nature out here. Alright. I think that's good. There was no bullet Cotton knew that would cause this sort of damage, no matter what the pulp storybooks might tell. Nothing obeyed the rules of nature out here. All right? So I'm sort of acknowledging that I've broken some rules here. Don't try for fancy shots, Cotton said. Just kill him. I was aiming for his head. That's what I feared you'd say. The creature on the porch seemed flustered. It stepped back from the post that had left a green smear down the front of its duster that matched its teeth and beard. It pulled back the brass firing balls and then released them to snap back into place with a click-clack. It settled itself into an unbraced shooting stance with ragged boots set wide. Then it wrapped its hand around the balls and levered the shaft. Cotton and John both fired at once, or close enough it didn't matter. Close enough together. Close enough together that it didn't matter. One shot tore through the greasy beard. Green filth splashed out along the side of the creature's face. Cotton wouldn't swear by whether it was from the leaky beard itself or a more mortal wound to the inhuman flesh of the face or neck. The second shot tore through the figure's duster at the shoulder on the other side of the beard wound. The creature reacted to that one as more green stains spread from the wound under there. Alright. Spread more from the offended flesh under there. I used the word wound too many times. The offended flesh under there. The long veiny gun's blast drove into the ground in front of the porch, kicking up wet sand. All right. The shooter dove through the open doorway of the structure and vanished into the shadows inside as the two men on the horse tore past. They didn't fire as they moved up the trail. Train your barrel back onto his lair, Cotton ordered. Don't want him popping out to plug us in the back. John held on to his friend in front of him with one arm and twisted around to aim with the other. He wasn't sure he saw motion, but he fired anyway. The bullet grooved splinters out of the door frame on the way inside. The figure, John assumed it was the same one, let out a prolonged shriek like a metal rake along a schoolhouse slate. John, I didn't use Jake before, did I? Okay, no. John doubted the half-man was hit by that one, but the fellow didn't show himself again as he cried his anger at the gunman leaving him behind. I guess a man like that don't live this long in a place like this by standing still for us to shoot him, John said. I had actually originally planned to kill off that character, but again, like somebody that seems capable, as sort of this mutant creature does, would have to survive a little easier than just getting shot by the first people that ride by. So I changed it so that he ended up surviving this encounter with our heroes, I guess you'd say. He's no more man anymore than you speak. He's no more man. I don't think I not worded that right. Hold on. I'm trying to get fancy with the Western speak. Let me cut a word out and see if that helps. He's no more man than you. He's no more man at this point. He's no more a man at this point than you speak for a God that still loves us, Cotton said. That's a little convoluted, but I'm going to leave it. Reverend Saturday let the comment ride, but Cotton Wretched didn't leave it lie for long. John understood his friend was in a barbed mood, and he understood well enough. Just glad he'd... Too many understoods. Okay. John sensed. John sensed his friend was in a barbed mood, and he understood well enough. Just glad he'd agreed to come along. Helps those who helps themselves, huh? Alright, that's Cotton speaking. cotton, say pressed. Helps those who helps himself on cotton pressed. John rolled his eyes, a gesture he might not have made if facing Cotton, friend or not. That's not actually in the Bible. A lot of important shit ain't in there. A lot of crazy shit is. It don't got to be in there to be true, and it ain't true just 'cause it's written there, I say. You and plenty of others, Cotton. The land flattened out, which gave them a wide range of sight all around. I'm used to witches here. Alright, let me just change that to another sentence. Alright. The land flattened out, which gave them a wide range of sight all around. That might not be good, considering what out here, what things out here might see them too. They walked beside the horse to rest it a bit, but refused to stop outright. Horses weren't trains, and this one might well die right under them if they tried to stoke it along like it was made of iron and fed on coal. All right, so one problem in a lot of stories that use horses, one, they treat the horse like it's a car, and you can just kind of ride it around, same as you do that, or they ride the horse to death. And so you kind of try to avoid those two cliches. I end up going into kind of playing with one of those cliches, though, so hopefully I made it justified. Cries and roars rose far and deep on all sides of them in the distance, but not distant enough to satisfy them. Lightning in colors that wouldn't pass in normal times. Lightning in colors that wouldn't pass in normal times are flashed at the rocking and hazy horizon. Probably rocky, wouldn't you want to say that? I guess that's a typo. Alright, let me read it again and see if I've fixed whatever I was trying to do in this sentence. Lightning in colors that wouldn't pass in normal times flashed at the rocky and hazy horizon. The thunder blended with the monster's growls. God is a moral monster, Cotton said. John wrinkled his brow. Now you've at least proposed something interesting there. To answer that, you need to establish a morality apart from God and the Bible that props up most any moral code formed in the Western world, I'd suppose. Eyes stared at them out of the shapes of shadows racing over the ground from the angry clouds rushing above and turning day into night. The normal glow of green and red eyes from nocturnal creatures in the natural world didn't explain these bulbous, again, I did it again, these, have I used strange in this paragraph? Well, you just say strange. I knew I'd leaned on that word too hard. I could just feel it the first time I heard it. I wrote this over a few days, and so I think I threw in a bulbous every day that I worked on it. We authors, myself included, often will get fixated on a word and end up overusing it. And displayed these strange eyes gazing at them from all sides. I use all sides already? No, that's fine. These eyes glowed like slow-burning swamp gas in poisonous flames. God setting morality for all of us is kind of like a judge trying his own case for his crimes against humanity, don't you think? John didn't think any such thing as his hand fell to his gun, like still warm in its holster. Cotton, I see them. Mount up. Let's see if we can't die a little deeper into hell. Maybe save your God and his devil a little time. The shadows drew deeper. I was trying to change it up, but I think shadows grow deeper. They don't draw deeper. The shadows grew deeper as the horse, already lathered with sweat, carried two men on its back at a full run again. Deeper shadows. Okay, don't want to go darker. I already said deeper. Darker shadows moved low along the ground, looking out with eyes filled by sickly, darker living shadows moving low along the ground. Lord, here are all INGs here. Darker living shadows moved. Let's do that. Make that the ED. Darker living shadows moved low along the ground, looking out with eyes filled by sickly green light. The creatures lashed out along the hard-pan floor as they drew up behind the horse, losing some of its steam almost immediately. Both men endeavored to fire into the darkness within darkness, but doubted they did any damage. They started to pull away, but then the horse stuttered to a stop and heaved for air. Its legs folded under the beast, and it rolled to its side. Both men sprung and rolled away themselves in two different directions to keep from being pinned under. The approaching monsters redoubled their efforts to cover the unimpressive distance between themselves and the pair of humans. John had lost count of his shots, but took aim without bothering to reload. Let's not say lost count. John had miscounted. Alright. Because I use lost count of his shots later in the story, I think. John had miscounted his shots, but took aim without bothering to reload. The clouds broke enough to spill a stream of sunlight onto the harsh ground. It wasn't even on them or even around them, but the patch of sunlight was close and swept across the desert ahead of them. The shadowy creatures drew back, skittered a few more steps on whatever appendages served their locomotion, and then fled back to whatever served them as shelter. John took the opportunity to reload. One of his guns was completely empty. The sunlight faded for a moment and then came back stronger. It was still just a single traveling patch, which broiled darkness above, through the broiling darkness above, but it changed the landscape with its spotlight. John winked at Cotton and motioned to the sky with one of his pistols. "Don't even say it, preacher. I'm in no mood. Just happy with the outcome. Stroke of luck, if not providence. I'll take it." Cotton narrowed his eyes at John. He glanced down at the heaving sides of the horse and turned west over open ground. "Waiting here for the animal to recover just gets us closer to true dark, and moonlight won't hold those abominations back. Even on foot we'll not get far enough, I fear, but it's the best bad option." It's good, but I'm going to make it a little clearer. Best of the bad options. Trying to be a little too cute. I'll just be a little more forthright there. Cotton walked around to the head of the prone horse and drew back the hammer of his right-hand pistol, aiming down on its skull. John took a couple side steps and then waited. Cotton eased the hammer back down and knelt to unbuckle the saddle from where it held the horse's belly. The beast gave no reaction other than to roll its eyes. Turning west, they walked side by side, leaving the animal behind. So I guess I kind of rode him to death there anyway. Shame on me. It would have been mercy to end him fast rather than to leave him there either to be turned into something unnatural or ravaged by something that already has. Okay, I guess that's Cotton saying it. Let's say Cotton said. Cotton said. They holstered their weapons and walked westward in wordless company, with only the sounds of their drawing breath, crunching boots, and the high wind over the low ground. Lightning danced within the rolling black clouds, but the howl of the wind buried the thunder, and even the sounds of distant monsters couldn't break through as far as their ears. Grit picked up on the relentless wind and threatened to grow into a full-fledged sandstorm. They pulled their bandanas up to their lower lids, like bandits, and pulled down the brims of their hats to shield their eyes as best they could while facing mostly against the gusts. There wasn't much to see, but the moment there was, they would need to see it because they couldn't hear a damn thing. They would need to see it. Don't need to emphasize would. Yeah. Alright, Cotton didn't even realize the shape that in front of them was it. The rest of the town had been flattened for one thing. Last time Cotton was here before the devil's business had made it nearly this far east. Before, right? This far east, comma. It hadn't been much to look at, but now the place was nothing. For another thing, they had walked into the edge of night and beyond, even though the wind had dropped to an eerie silence, in a land where the usual creatures of the night didn't dare to speak. Darkness hid distinguishing details from Cotton's stressed and exhausted senses. John Saturday knew where they were, but didn't bother to explain it. Like the other nocturnal creatures, he decided quiet was the way to go. Alright, at this point, I didn't know where the story was going. I knew where they were about to walk into, but there were a couple things I didn't know. So kind of mark this point in your mind, I guess, and at the end I'll sort of explain. I didn't know what the ending was going to be, what I changed my mind to it being, and I didn't know exactly who they were going to see. I knew it was a she because we established that at the beginning of the story, but there were a couple ways I might have gone, and it was at this point that I decided. There were a couple days between this point and finishing the story today, and I sort of decided at this point that, or just past this point, how I was going to end the story. They walked over the buried boards of the structures that used to be a town, where John used to live and serve, where Cotton used to have friends. As they drew closer, I keep saying drew, so let me change this one. As they moved closer, moved. As they moved closer, the tilted white steeple and the crooked cross atop came into relief from the night all around. All the oblong openings that used to hold stained glass stood empty and dark, with the light-catching scenes shattered inside. One portico door hung open, with the hinges screeching dutifully to complete the scene. To complete, let's say, the mood. To complete the mood of the scene. The other hung askew, torn off its hinges and wedged tight between the steps and the narrow rain cover. Nothing drew up behind them, nothing stepped out to greet them or stop them, and nothing under heaven or earth made a sound except for the hinges and their boots on dry ground. Let me say lifeless. I used dry a lot already. Lifeless ground. This bothered Cotton far more than everything that came before. Cotton grunted twice. John Saturday spoke low. If you have anything else to say, probably should get it off your soul before we go in to face whatever waits. I got nothing to confess to you or your imaginary friend, John. Off your chest, then. Cotton sniffed and cleared his throat like he'd caught some dust. He said, "A perfect God that created this is being measured on a sliding scale. If he's out there," John drew his gun. You do draw a gun. Let's just say pulled. Alright. If he's out there, John pulled his gun free and pointed it to the sky before bringing it back down level to the earth. I want him on my side. Technically, I don't think I'm supposed to use commas there, because that's not actually a dialogue tag. There's no said, there's no asked, none of that stuff. But I'm going to leave it in the commas so that it kind of flows as one sentence. An editor, if I ever submitted this, would probably change that. Beautiful, stupid and beautiful. The gods of this blasted land have shown themselves clear, Cotton. Showed themselves clear with no faith required. I want my business with them to be over and nothing more to do with them after that. Business. John swallowed and added no more. Added no more. Cotton drew a weapon of his own. I'm going to leave drew in there. Cotton drew a weapon of his own. Brandish a weapon. No. Cotton drew a weapon of his own with a thumb on the hammer and a finger inside the trigger guard, but neither digit pulled yet. If we succeed, and you start praising God for the work of my guns, I might save the last bullet for you. He drew up the corners of his mouth. He's always drawing. Let's turn him up. Turn it up. Alright, John turned up the corners. John turned up the corners of his mouth. If we survive, I'd be happy for you to claim the credit and all my praise. Up the steps, side by side, John entered the dark sanctuary first. Cotton followed, and then stepped out to the side to clear John's back. Cotton's eyes were adjusted for dark, but this place was a deeper darkness, normally reserved for the inside of graves. Cotton clicked back the hammer under his thumb, and then keep drawing now. We're done with bulbous, and now we're drewing. And held still. And then held still to listen. John trudged forward as if he owned the place. Cotton supposed the preacher once had. John listened for nothing, but pushed and kicked aside broken pews, sections of fallen ceiling and roof, and other debris. Cotton waited a moment longer, knowing there was nothing to hear in John's crashing around. In all John's crashing around, let's say. All John's crashing around. He moved forward along one wall, searching without moving anything. Searching with his eyes. Searching with his eyes without moving anything. Throw a comma in there, why not? John did enough that on both sides. John did enough of that on both sides as he made swift work up the center aisle. Reverend John Saturday stood with his gun down at his side and boots wide apart facing the altar, pulpit, and choir loft. The altar slab folded into the table frame along a jagged line, broken like one of the tablets of Moses. Stained with shadow, the entire scene was outline and darkness. It was all outline. All outline and darkness. John bypassed the dais, say dais, because that's actually a word. Alright, dais, and made for one of the doors on the stage right corner. Cotton moved forward and up the steps, stage left. The stains on the broken altar were more than shadow. A Bible too large to be carried in one hand lay open on the pulpit surface. Cotton leaned in to see if he could identify the passage, maybe get a taste of John's last sermon. The pages were gouged out, and something consistent with meat piled in. It smelled of rotten filth. Black insects, unseen in the darkness, swarmed around the book and then Cotton's face when he drew too close. When he leaned in too close. He pulled away, and the swarm followed as he tried to wave them away. Wave them off. Do-aways. Wave them off. Between the chairs of the choir loft, ropey intestines weaved. Not between again. Weaved around and through. Okay, let's try that paragraph again. Between the chairs of the choir loft, ropey intestines weaved around and through the wooden slats of the chair backs, tying them together. Unlike the meat piled in the cored-out Bible, these remains had time to dry out to a jerky consistency These remains had dried out to a jerky consistency that even bugs surrounding Cotton's head in a harassing halo had no interest in. What happened here? Cotton's voice died just past his lips with no echo. Cotton. John, outside, out back. He moved across the dais. Again, let's change that to a real word and not whatever that is I just made up. He moved across the dais and through the open door after John. They stood in the boneyard behind the church. John dropped to his knees at an unmarked grave fresher than the rest and started clawing the dirt with his hands. John, we don't know that's her, and even if it is, just help me, Cotton. You come this far, finish it with me. Cotton turned in a full circle in the midst of the church graveyard, where the dead rested back. Graveyard, comma, a place. In the midst of the church graveyard, comma, a place where the dead rested back when death still made sense. He turned full around again in the other direction. He saw nothing, heard nothing, understood nothing. Nothing except John's mad scraping and a blubbering grunt with each dragging effort. We need to go, John. If you ever loved her, help me free her. Judging on what was inside, I'm not sure what there is to find under there. They bury them alive. That's what they do. That's how they do it. Come on. I don't know if you can hear the bugs outside greeting me. Cotton's eyes cut from side to side and then back to the preacher on his knees. He used his free hand to wave at the cloud of flying insects. He used his free hand to wave at the cloud of flying insects that had followed him out here from the pulpit. Who does? You know who. Help me while there still might be time. Alright. Cotton holstered and then took up a broken shard of stone that might have been a bit of marker. He drove it into the turned dirt. He drove it into the turned dirt like the spike of a pick and raked out looser dirt for John to move aside. Maybe they'd finish the job without John ripping. Maybe they'd finish the job without John ripping out all his fingernails in the process. The insects crawled around his face and hummed in his ears. But, specify who's here, but Cotton let them have at him. The point of Cotton's stone struck wood with a hollow thump. Would it be a thump or a thud? Let's make it a thud. With a hollow thud. This grave was no deeper than 6 inches past the natural surface. The wood splintered and gouged as Cotton cleared more of it with the stone. John dug hand over hand along one edge of the grave. I think I got it. Help me lift. Cotton rammed the stone down on the wood lid of the coffin. It split into a profane gash before Cotton raised the stone for a second strike. Let's make it a follow-up. For a follow-up. For a follow-up strike. Alright. No, you fool. Help me open it proper. Cotton struck again and again, widening the fissure. John pulled the lid from the side, even against the weight of the remaining dirt in one of Cotton's knees. You'll ruin it all. Stop, man. Cotton cast the stone aside and fed his fingers into the split wood. John pulled from the edge and lifted the gap enough to get his fingers under it. Something popped in the Reverend's back. Then Cotton shifted his weight, and the nails pressed into John's flesh, sticking him and pinning him. John cried out, and then outright screamed. Rending the thin wood of the coffin lid like a stubborn sheet, Cotton straddled the grave so he could cast the halves aside like the second tablet of Moses. As I was writing that, I had remembered the imagery of the broken altar being like a tablet of Moses, and then this was kind of splitting again, so I wanted to call back to that. Having it as two beats, I think, is good. I don't know how poetic it is, but I'm doing my best. John wrenched his hands free of the nails and bled from a half-dozen punctures as he pressed his palms into the grave dirt to staunch the bleeding and press against. And let's change this one. He flattened. All right. John wrenched his hands free of the nails and bled from a half-dozen punctures as he flattened his palms into the grave dirt to staunch the bleeding and press against the sharp pain of his injuries. What have you done? Empty. Cotton lost his balance. He scraped his leg on one rough edge of the split in the lid and cracked the bottom of the pine box as his boot planted inside the empty coffin. What is this? Wind swirled and whispered around the boundaries of the small cemetery as if the powers outside couldn't enter. Then the twisted forms of wraiths pressed in from all sides as if, let's say, advanced. Advanced in from all sides as if nothing could stop them. John scrambled out of the grave to meet them and held up his wounded hands packed with bloody mud. Stop. Cotton drew his gun, knowing damn well it would do no good, but set both his feet in the open mouth of the ruined coffin to unload on them anyway. I brought him like you asked, John cried. You can prepare another grave for him. It'll still work, please. What are you saying, John? What is this? Something more solid than the rest of the howling choir of spirits. Let's make that plural. Of spirits rushed forward into the yard. John dropped to his knees and covered his head. She leapt over him and struck Cotton in the chest, driving him to his back in the coffin with her on top. John twisted around and spread his hands in the air above the grave as if preaching a funeral. Take him. Give me her as you promised, but take him. Take him. Through the scales of ruin on her face and the shock white of her eyes, he still recognized her and fully understood what she had become, even before she opened her jaws wide and breathed rot into his face under her. The swarm of insects between them lighted on her face. They crawled in and out of her mouth and nostrils. They traveled over the surface of her dry eyes without getting stuck and with no reaction from her. Take him. I need to get his motivation a little stronger here. Take him. Free her. Take him. Free her. Shut up, John, and to hell with you both. Cotton wedged a forearm into her throat and under her chin, lifting her snapping teeth away from his nose. Her fingers dug into his sides with increasing agony, and he had no doubt she would tear into him given enough time. John rose to his feet. He already kind of stood up, didn't he? So he rose to his full height. All right. John rose to his full height. Take him, finish it. Give her back to me like you promised. The race rushed in, billowing like cloth in the wind, and wrapped up John with the constricting force of serpents. No, you promised, his voice issued choked instead of triumphant. They whipped John Saturday around to face them, and he lost his voice and his mind. Cotton snaked his gun arm up between their bodies and pressed the bore of his weapon into the soft flesh below her jaw. He tilted her head up further with it. The gun shook wildly in his grasp, but this wasn't a question of aim. He prepared to fire up through her skull and into the silent sky. All right. Screams filled the air, but Cotton couldn't tell if any of them were John's. Either way, he hoped it hurt. The white bled out of her eyes, and she blinked. Her flesh shifted colors, and the scales turned to light blemish and scars. He knew it to be a mistake, but he softened his resistance and let her look into his eyes one more time. "Cotton, I'm lost. Where am I?" "In trouble, Sarah. All of us are." John's body heaved into the air above them, out of the swirling darkness. John rolled her off him. "Move!" They scrambled out of the grave, and John slammed down into it behind them. Down into it behind them, with billowing darkness flooding in on top of him. Was that John? Her face had improved, but her breath still smelled of death. Not as we used to know him. "Move, girl." They ran a few steps toward where the grassy patch used to be, between the quaint cemetery and the busiest street in a quiet little town. The wraiths swirled around from both sides and hemmed them in. Sarah drew Cotton's other gun off his hip, with him barely noticing. She fired holes through the spirit until the gun clicked empty. The holes into the night lingered a moment. They bobbed with the motion of the evil around them, and then healed themselves closed. She took bullets from their leather slots off his belt and reloaded. John knew it was a pointless act, but he fired a few shots himself. If any man found him dead, Cotton didn't want it to be with his chambers still full. Cotton didn't realize he was reaching for her hand until she refused his by swatting it away. I wanted to establish some agency for her, so I had her take a gun, I had her fire, had her reload, and then had her refuse his hand. She's still a woman getting rescued. So I kind of didn't want her to be fully a damsel in distress, so that was kind of my effort as we introduced this this object of the mission here. Something more solid rushed from out of the spirits. Let's change that up. Out of the spirit wall. Spirit wall around them. Alright. Something more solid rushed forward from out of the spirit wall around them. The same shock-white eyes and scaly dead skin changed the face. The same shock-white eyes and scaly dead skin Cotton had faced before had changed the face. Right. See if that kind of fixes things. The same shock-white eyes and scaly dead skin Cotton had faced before had changed the face, but not enough to hide the identity of a man Cotton no longer considered a friend or a man. John found a voice again, but lost a soul. His new voice growled out of pale, leering lips. Praise God. Cotton lost count of his bullets since his last reload, but he pulled the trigger again just the same. As he promised, he used his last round. As promised, he used his last round to end John. The shot caved in his forehead and obliterated the back of the head in an eruption that still looked mostly like living brain, though dark rot had set in faster than was natural. Alright, just like we had two examples of something that was like the broken tablets of Moses, we really have two promises here. His promise, whatever his promise was about Sarah that caused him to come back for her, and his offhanded promise to John that if he praised God after they were successful, he'd use his last bullet to kill him, and that's kind of what he did. I sort of want to allude to both promises being kept, so I may have to do that at the end. The shot caved in his forehead. Okay, we did all that. Cotton found himself wondering if Sarah really had time to heal from this. Okay, let's move really. If Sarah had time to really heal from this. Heal from this, coming back as quickly as John had rotted away. Now she took his arm and pulled. Move! The race had drawn back into the graveyard. The last two survivors fled into the open. Is that yours? She asked. Cotton pulled his eyes away from John's sprawled body and saw the horse waiting healthy distance. I don't know what Gelthy is. A healthy distance from the front of the church. It still bore its bit and bridle. The reins spilled down by one of its legs. It is. What happened to your saddle? Long story, bad trip. I'm just glad he came for us. She reached the horse first and swung herself onto its, let's say, bare back. Onto its bare back. She offered him a hand. Alright, coming up on the last page. Thank you guys for sticking with me. She offered him a hand. And that should be a period. He took it, even though he wanted to believe he didn't need it, and swung on behind her. Alright. Again, kind of letting her lead the horse out and him ride behind, so that she's not just a damsel in distress here. Sarah reined the animal around and kicked the mount. Sarah reined the animal around and kicked the mount into motion in a direction Cotton guessed was north, with no real confidence in his sense of direction. It was a different direction than they had come, but that was fine by him. The wind from their speed finally swept the cloud of flies and gnats behind them. I know a place we can hole up, she called over her shoulder. He turned his face away from her breath. Not sure what to do after that. We'll find out one way or the other. Did John come to get you? She asked. He came to get you, even though he knew I was gone. Cotton chewed at the inside of his cheeks and finally said that he did. Not a man for giving up hope, I guess. She let go of the reins with one hand and held his gun back toward him, I would say. Didn't like my prepositions there. Let's read it again. She let go of the reins with one hand and held his gun back toward him. This one's loaded. He took it and holstered it. He took it from her. Nope. Took it from her. He took it from her and holstered it. Seems like that would be an easy sentence to get. He took it from her and holstered it. She seized the reins with both hands, and he held on tight. He held on tight to her. That's kind of hint. I kind of want to hint that maybe she's not over this thing that's got her. Sarah still felt cold to him through her shirt where he held to her ribs, but she was warming slowly. Alright. Sarah still felt cold to him through her shirt where he held to her ribs, but she was warming slowly. He used your promise to make you come. He used your promise to make you come for me. He used your promise to make you come for me, convinced you to do this stupid thing on my account. That it? Might be best to let the dead lie at this point. Whether she agreed or not, they rode onward. Let's see, Cotton. First of all, I got the man's name wrong. Cotton made good on 2 promises that night. One, he made kind of making a mess of things here, but give me just a second. Alright, so I want that last line to be its own paragraph. Whether she agreed or not, they rode onward. Cotton made good on 2 promises that night. Make it a colon. Cotton made good on 2 promises that night. One he made long ago to a girl and her family. Let's make that a semicolon. Just get all fancy here. Whether she agreed or not, they rode onward. Cotton made good on 2 promises that night. One he made long ago to a girl and her family. The other he made off-handed outside a haunted church to a man he'd still believed to be his friend. I think that makes good on the story. Let's see if I identified the 2 promises well enough. Whether she agreed or not, they rode onward. Cotton made good on 2 promises that night. One he made long ago to a girl and her family. The other he made off-handed outside a haunted church to a man he still believed to be his friend. Sarah Saturday and John Wretched survived the night. So again, I kind of finish off by showing that she has the same last name as John. So maybe that's John's wife, maybe that's John's sister, and Cotton loves her. Maybe there's something else going on. It could be that she was originally Sarah Wretched, and she married John Saturday, so it's actually Cotton's sister and John's wife. There's a couple different ways that could be, but it indicates this relationship that maybe explains why John turned traitor. Like I said, back at that point I indicated I didn't know that John was going to betray Cotton, and so the first half of the story was written without that knowledge in mind. And from that point going where they see the church, I knew that John was going to try to trade Cotton off. There's a number of things that aren't explained here, and that's kind of on purpose. I like to trust the audience to fill in the gaps, give them enough to where they can kind of fill in the backstory themselves. We don't know why that the land is cursed, what happened that turned it bad. It appears to be marching east. I'm probably going to leave that opening section because I kind of want you to know through the whole story that they're running down a girl, that they're going together to try to rescue somebody. So I'm going to leave it in. and you don't know, that kind of lets you know where they're going in the ending without giving it away. We know that the whatever curse this is moving east, and people are fleeing ahead of it. This town used to be far ahead of it, and now it kind of got destroyed. And this is where John apparently preached. It's where Cotton used to have friends, and so it used to be a living place that Cotton knew, and maybe where all this relationship was built up. We also don't know what sort of curse was involved with Sarah and then passed on to John. It appears that they need to be buried in the ground. The coffin wasn't buried, though, because maybe they had already turned Sarah and they were just preparing it for John, or preparing it for Cotton. That John had somehow promised these creatures that he was going to bring Cotton back to them. Somehow Cotton breaking the lid was a problem, so John had expected to open this coffin, hand him over to these things. They would put him in the ground and this presumably turn him. I imagine they would have turned on John too. These don't seem to be creatures that keep their promises very well, although you can argue in a way they did. So Cotton breaking the lid to the coffin somehow messed up this ritual, and the creatures sort of turn on John as a result of it. John turning into one of those things, somehow Cotton messing up the ritual, John turning into one of these undead creatures, somehow frees Sarah. And again, I'm kind of giving hints. Her breath still stinks. She's still cold. She has some blemishes and scars. That maybe she hasn't completely healed. Maybe this curse is still on her to some degree. And Cotton kind of had a sense that even though she appeared to change, there was a mistake to not finish her off. But if this were a novel, it would continue on, and we would see what happened to her. We would see where they're going and how they're fleeing together. Maybe Cotton choosing to keep John's secret so that Sarah Saturday didn't know her relation, whatever that relationship is, had betrayed Cotton in order to try and free her. I don't think she would like that. And Cotton maybe doesn't want to mess up the memory of his friend, even though his friend was looking to make a sacrifice. In the original story, I was thinking of having John and Cotton stay good with each other. John would have still died, and Cotton still would have left with the girl. At one point, I was thinking possibly making the girl younger so that perhaps she's a daughter or something along those lines. But decided, I actually don't say her age, but there's an implication here that she's the same age or an adult as John and Cotton were. So again, this could play into a novel. It almost maybe reads like the beginning of a novel, and it's kind of left open. It's sort of this idea that there's story that existed before this began, and there's story that exists after it's over, and it's sort of kind of what a short story should be, I think. Not sure if that story is perfect. It's kind of an experiment to see what I could do playing around with various tropes. And so that's where we leave it. That story will be on Patreon tomorrow as of the time I'm recording this, and then this video will follow it up. Kind of a little bit of a long video to edit the story, but anybody that's interested can watch it. So thank you all for following along, and I'll talk to you again soon.